In 2015, a shocking murder occurred in a small town in Oregon. Benjamin "Ben" Miller, a 35-year-old manager at a construction company, was found shot in his car on the outskirts of town. The main suspect was Olivia Thompson, a 33-year-old elementary school teacher, who was revealed to be the mistress of the married Ben. The investigation of this complex case, intertwined with love, passion, jealousy, and revenge, unexpectedly uncovered dark secrets from Ben's past. Investigators and Olivia herself, desperately trying to prove her innocence, had to unravel a web of mysterious events rooted in Miller's college years. The truth that eventually surfaced shocked everyone who knew Ben and thought of him as a respectable family man. Let's dive into the details of this high-profile crime, tracing how an innocent affair led to a tragic end, and the role that Ben's youthful mistakes played in the outcome. The story of Olivia and Ben is a classic example of how long-buried secrets can resurface years later and destroy a life already shattered by them. Olivia Thompson and Benjamin Miller met in 2001 while both were students at Oregon State University in Eugene. They studied business and often crossed paths in lectures and seminars. Shared interests and a similar sense of humor quickly brought them closer. Initially, they were just friends, but after a few months, warm feelings blossomed into mutual affection and then a passionate romance. Their relationship developed quickly. Ben was tall, athletic, and charming, a social butterfly. Olivia was an attractive, smart, and ambitious young woman with a promising future. Many classmates saw them as the perfect couple and even predicted a wedding soon. But their relationship wasn't destined to become a happy marriage. As their studies progressed, Ben started to drift away from Olivia. He spent more time at parties with questionable company, drinking and skipping classes. Rumors began to circulate that Miller was dealing drugs and was drowning in debt. Olivia didn't want to believe it and did everything to support her boyfriend. However, she soon had to face the truth that Ben was living a double life. After almost 2 years together, following yet another argument over Ben's prolonged absence, Olivia made the tough decision to leave him. The final straw was discovering that Miller had secretly dropped out of university. Thompson prioritized her education and future over the lies and irresponsibility of her partner. Olivia made it clear that it was over between them. The breakup was painful for both of them. They vowed never to see or speak to each other again. After the split, their paths diverged for 14 long years. During that time, each tried to start fresh, carefully avoiding any reminders of their former partner and the youthful drama that came with them. Their next meeting didn't occur until 2015 under quite unexpected circumstances. By that time, 35-year-old Ben had been married to Lisa Miller for several years, whom he met shortly after breaking up with Olivia. Lisa worked as a nurse in a hospital where Ben was treated for kidney problems, consequences of his wild college days. She nursed him back to health and became his steadfast support in his battle with alcoholism. A year after they met, they got married and had a son named Ethan. Meanwhile, Olivia, who was 33 at the time, never married and dedicated herself entirely to her teaching career. She taught elementary school and earned a master's degree in education. Her career came first, and romantic relationships took a back seat after several failed attempts to build something serious. Their paths crossed by chance at a supermarket, where Olivia stopped after work and Ben dropped by on his way home. They literally bumped into each other in the vegetable section, both reaching for the same bright red pepper. Their eyes met, and despite the years that had passed, they immediately recognized each other. The shock of the unexpected encounter quickly turned into awkwardness. The former lovers exchanged polite greetings, unsure of how to behave after so many years of silence. But soon the tension eased, and they began chatting, sharing the major milestones of their lives over the past years. Olivia couldn't help but notice the wedding ring on Ben's finger. It turned out that Ben had changed a lot over the past 14 years. The reckless upperclassman had become a solid man, a good family man, and a successful professional. Ben proudly talked about his job, his wife, and their young son, showing photos on his phone. It seemed he had completely rid himself of his former vices and was now living a law-abiding life. Their meeting at the store didn't last long, but by the end, Ben and Olivia exchanged phone numbers. They decided to meet up sometime to properly catch up, reminisce about the old days, and learn more about how life had unfolded for each other. At the time, it seemed like a perfectly innocent idea to both of them. But neither had any idea that this meeting would set off a chain of fatal events. The first meeting between Olivia and Ben after a long separation happened 2 weeks later at a cafe near the school where Thompson worked. They talked for hours, reminiscing about the happy moments of their past and laughing at their youthful mistakes and grudges. They deliberately avoided discussing unpleasant moments and the real reasons for their breakup. Both pretended they harbored no ill feelings toward each other. The old warm feelings rekindled with new intensity. Ben was clearly flattered by his former girlfriend's attention, and Olivia was happy to feel desired and loved again. They started calling and texting each other often, sharing details about their lives. Miller complained about the monotony of family life and the burden of a mortgage, while Thompson lamented her loneliness and difficult students. They both found solace in each other. Before long, their friendly meetings turned into real dates. Ben invited Olivia to a cozy restaurant in a hotel on the outskirts of the city. Conversations, laughter, wine, and music set the stage for their rekindled passion, and they spent the night together, loving each other as if it were the last time. In the morning, once the excitement had worn off, the gravity of what had happened began to sink in. Olivia scolded herself for the reckless decision but couldn't deny that she still loved Ben. He, in turn, swore that their encounter wasn't just a fleeting affair but real feelings reignited. But what about his wife and child? Ben assured Olivia that his marriage to Lisa had been crumbling for a long time, and an affair was inevitable. He promised to confess everything to his wife and file for divorce. Miller, however, wasn't being truthful. He had no plans to leave Lisa. His wife provided him with a convenient support system and was a familiar part of the respectable life he had carefully built. Olivia, on the other hand, symbolized passion and the freedom he craved. Ben simply wanted to combine the two without worrying about the consequences or the feelings of both women. Little did he know, his double life would soon catch up with him. Their secret affair lasted for about 2 months. They met in secret, mostly in motels and hotels in neighboring towns, far from prying eyes. Olivia brought up the future more than once, but Miller always dodged the question or gave vague promises. This frustrated and upset Thompson, but she didn't have the courage to break the toxic cycle. One evening, after returning home from another secret rendezvous with Ben, Olivia found a white envelope with no return address or stamps in her mailbox. Inside was a note made from letters cut out of newspapers. "I know about you and Ben. This won't end well for you." Olivia was gripped with fear. Someone had uncovered their secret and was now threatening her. But who? Could it be Lisa, who had tracked down her unfaithful husband? It seemed unlikely that such an intelligent and refined woman would resort to anonymous threats. And how could she even know where her husband's lover lived? Ben swore that his wife didn't suspect anything. The next day, Olivia received another threatening message, this time on her cell phone. A text from an unknown number read, "Stop seeing Ben, or you'll regret it." Later that evening, Thompson found a dead rat on her doorstep with a note that said, "You're next." Panic consumed her. When Olivia immediately told Ben about the threats, he was initially pleased. He was convinced that Lisa had somehow discovered the affair. To him, this was the perfect excuse to speed up the divorce and start a new life with Olivia. But Thompson wasn't convinced by this explanation. She felt that something wasn't right. Soon, the threats became daily occurrences, and they grew more sinister and terrifying. Olivia found threatening notes in her purse, on her desk, and under her car's windshield wipers. She received calls with threats to her home phone and even photos of her house taken by a hidden camera. The unknown individual made it clear they had access to her home. Olivia felt like she was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. She was afraid to leave the house and slept with the lights on. She was hesitant to go to the police, fearing that the affair with a married man would be exposed, which could cost her both her job at the school and her reputation. Thompson begged Ben to confess everything to his wife to end the nightmare, but he kept putting off the difficult conversation. The terrifying situation came to a head 3 weeks after the anonymous threats began. On a Friday evening, Olivia stayed late at work, preparing decorations for the school play. As she walked to her car around 11 p.m. in the empty parking lot, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in the back of her head and lost consciousness. When Thompson awoke, she found herself in an abandoned basement with her hands tied behind her back. Her mouth was taped shut, preventing her from calling for help. In the corner, a man in a black mask with eye holes sat on a chair, silently watching Olivia, clearly savoring her fear. He held a hunting knife in his hand. Olivia was certain these were her last moments. Tears of despair streamed down her face as the masked man approached her and ripped the tape from her mouth. "So, you thought you could get away with stealing a man from his family, huh? Now you'll pay for everything," growled a male voice that was definitely not Lisa's. Fighting the dizziness brought on by fear, Olivia tried to plead for mercy. She said she loved Ben and didn't mean to harm anyone. She insisted that he had come to her, complaining about problems in his marriage, and that Lisa would be better off without him. But her pleas fell on deaf ears. The attacker only laughed and began unzipping his pants. What happened next, Olivia remembered only in fragments. The man raped her brutally, saying she had brought this upon herself. After satisfying his urges, he started to strangle Thompson. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, a noise suddenly echoed through the basement. The attacker was distracted and loosened his grip. Olivia used this moment of weakness to kick her assailant in the groin with all her remaining strength. He howled in pain and briefly lost focus. Thompson managed to slip away and crawl toward the exit. Behind her, she heard shouts of, "Stop, you bitch!" and the sound of footsteps chasing her. By some miracle, Olivia escaped and slammed the basement door shut. The lock clicked. Half-naked and trembling uncontrollably, Olivia made her way to the nearest house and knocked on the door. A sleepy, middle-aged man answered. Seeing the bloodied and battered woman on his doorstep, he immediately called the police and an ambulance. Within 10 minutes, officers arrived and found the basement door broken. The rapist was nowhere to be found. After the horrifying ordeal, Olivia spent several days in the hospital. The police opened a rape case and took her statement. Thompson recounted the details of her affair with the married man, the anonymous threats she had received, and the attack by the unknown assailant. She gave them a description, but the mask made it difficult to create an accurate sketch. Investigators questioned Ben and Lisa. Miller admitted to the affair with his former girlfriend but claimed he had never heard of the threatening letters before. According to him, Olivia hadn't told him about them, fearing for his marriage. Lisa, on the other hand, swore that she had no knowledge of her husband's infidelity and certainly wasn't involved in the harassment or the attack on Thompson. The police checked the alibis of all the key people connected to the case on the night of Olivia's attack. Both Ben and Lisa were at home that evening, confirmed by their young son and security camera footage from their building. The circle of suspects narrowed to unknown individuals from either Ben's or Olivia's past. Once again, Ben talked about getting a divorce, urging Olivia to start a new life with him as soon as she recovered from her trauma. Lisa didn't object and even promised not to seek a share of the property or custody of their son. It seemed like a happy ending was near, but Olivia couldn't shake off her bad feeling. After being discharged, she went to Ben's home to collect her things and discuss their plans for the future. Lisa answered the door. She looked defeated but tried to maintain her composure. Unexpectedly, Olivia felt sympathy for her and invited her to talk. The two women secluded themselves in the kitchen. What Olivia heard from Lisa left her in shock. It turned out that just hours before the attack on Thompson, Ben had beaten his wife, demanding she immediately agree to a divorce. He had threatened to kill her and their son if Lisa stood in the way of his happiness with Olivia. In fear for her child's life, Miller had agreed to all of her husband's demands. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. How could she have been so blind and trusting? Ben wasn't the man he claimed to be. He was a liar and a scoundrel, willing to resort to blackmail and violence for his own selfish desires. At that moment, her phone rang. It was the investigator on the case of Thompson's rape. His voice sounded alarmed. The police officer delivered shocking news. Ben Miller had been found dead in his car on the outskirts of the city. He had been shot twice in the chest with a pistol. The estimated time of death was between 8 a.m. and 10 a.m. this morning. For Olivia and Lisa, the news hit like a bolt out of the blue. Both women were immediately called in for questioning at the police station. They had to recount their troubled relationships with Ben, including his infidelities, threats, and physical abuse. Everyone who had conflicts with the deceased became suspects, but Olivia was the one who drew the most suspicion. Several witnesses, including Ben's colleagues and mutual acquaintances, insisted that Miller and his lover had been having serious disagreements recently. Allegedly, Olivia had been pressuring him to leave his family, but he kept delaying. Neighbors also reported hearing loud arguments between Olivia and Ben at her house. The most damning evidence, however, came from a security camera near the Millers' home. The footage showed a woman, who looked very much like Olivia, leaving the building on the morning of the murder. Although the woman's face was obscured by large sunglasses and a scarf, her figure and clothing closely resembled Olivia's. The investigators presented Olivia with this evidence, accusing her of killing Ben out of jealousy and unrequited love. Olivia vehemently denied the accusations, insisting she was being framed. She claimed she had been at home, across town, at the time of Ben's death. But if she wasn't the woman in the footage, then who was? While the investigation continued, Olivia was suspended from her job at the school. Nearly all her friends and acquaintances turned their backs on her. People whispered behind her back, gossiping about the vicious teacher who had supposedly killed for love. How ironic it was to have been a model citizen all her life, only to become the prime suspect in such a heinous crime overnight. At Ben's funeral, his grief-stricken widow publicly accused Olivia of being responsible for his death. Lisa shouted that it was all Olivia's fault. She had seduced the perfect family man and clouded his mind with her deceitful charms. Lisa vowed she wouldn't rest until Ben's killer was behind bars. Olivia had no choice but to hire a lawyer to defend her. The legal fees were expensive, and without severance pay from her job, her savings were quickly running out. She needed to establish an alibi for the morning of the murder and figure out who had set her up by dressing in her clothes. Her lawyer, Mr. Simmons, decided to launch his own investigation. He was particularly interested in the anonymous stalker who had been terrorizing Olivia. Could this person have escalated their twisted game by killing Ben and framing Olivia? If they could establish a link between the stalker and someone in the love triangle, the case might take a new turn. Meanwhile, the police delved deeper into Ben's past. Although Miller had appeared to be a law-abiding and successful man, was he really as upstanding as everyone thought? Investigators focused on his recent social circles, particularly any conflicts or hidden aspects of his life. Olivia was beside herself with grief. On the one hand, she had lost the man she loved, even if he had turned out to be far from who he claimed to be. On the other hand, the weight of suspicion and judgment pressed on her from all sides. Lisa had openly accused her of murder, and both the police and the media seemed intent on finding evidence of her guilt. But unexpectedly, help arrived from a surprising source. Ben's old college friend, Nate Brooks, reached out to Olivia. He claimed that just days before his death, Ben had contacted him, asking for an urgent meeting. Ben wanted to discuss some old business that had come back to haunt him. Apparently, someone from his past had tracked him down and was threatening to expose certain shameful secrets. Nate Brooks' revelations shed light on the dark parts of Ben's life that neither his wife nor his lover had known about. It turned out that Ben had been hiding a part of his turbulent youth, during which he essentially led a double life. The things Ben had worked so hard to distance himself from had finally caught up with him at the worst possible time. Nate explained that during college, Ben had fallen in with the wrong crowd. His new friends were involved in petty theft and drug dealing, and they pulled Ben into their shady activities. At first, Ben just dabbled with recreational drugs, but he soon got in too deep. He owed his so-called friends a large sum of money and had no idea how to repay it. One of his friends then suggested a quick and easy way to get the cash: robbing a store. The plan was for Ben to distract the clerk while two masked accomplices stormed in and took the cash. All three of them were high at the time and weren't thinking straight. Things quickly went south. The clerk fought back, a struggle ensued, and one of the robbers shot him dead. Hearing the gunshot, Ben panicked and fled the scene. He hid out with some trusted friends for a few days, terrified of being arrested. But, to his surprise, the police never came for him. Later, Ben learned that his two accomplices had been caught in another robbery and were sentenced to long prison terms. They took the fall, and Ben's name never came up. After that, Ben cut ties with his criminal life and drugs. He dropped out of college, moved to a different state, and started over. He got married, had a son, and built a successful career. He had hoped his past would never catch up with him. But just days before his death, anonymous phone calls and letters began arriving, threatening to reveal his involvement in the robbery 14 years ago. Someone had discovered his dark secret and intended to ruin the respectable life he had worked so hard to build. Olivia was stunned by Nate's revelations. She never would have guessed that the man she loved had such a dark side. Ironically, it was Ben's deceit and double life that had driven them apart in the first place. She blamed herself for not recognizing the lies sooner. She had fallen for his promises of love and his claims that he would leave his wife. By the time she realized that Ben was playing a double game again, it was too late. Someone had killed him and framed her for the murder. Olivia was left wondering who the mysterious blackmailer was. If Ben had kept his criminal past a secret all these years, how had someone uncovered it? Could it have been one of his old criminal associates who had escaped prison and held a grudge all these years? Or had the truth come to light accidentally during the police investigation into Ben's murder? But then, what about the anonymous threats and the attack on Olivia? The whole situation seemed to be getting more complicated by the minute. Would she ever find out who was behind it all and, more importantly, why they had killed Ben and dragged her into this sordid affair? Tormented by grief and haunted by nightmares, Olivia resolved to find Ben's killer and her own tormentor at all costs. She could no longer sit idly by, waiting for the cops to dig up evidence of her guilt. Her gut told her that all the attacks on her and Ben were part of the same scheme. With the precision of a detective, Olivia combed through police reports and questioned witnesses. She placed particular hope in the testimony of Ben's old college friends. Surely, one of them knew more than they had shared with the police. In these conversations, unexpected details about Ben's final months began to surface. According to his classmates, when Ben disappeared after the botched robbery and the clerk's death, he left behind numerous debts. Since his accomplices had gone to prison, there was no one left to repay the money owed. Many people had tried to track Ben down, vowing to make him pay. Rumor had it that Ben had stolen a large sum of money intended for the organizer of the heist. Eventually, Ben vanished from town, and people gradually forgot about him. He seemed to be untroubled by thoughts of his old debts. But, unbeknownst to him, someone had held onto a grudge. In the last few years, Ben had reportedly reconnected with some of his old accomplices, who had recently been released on parole. They discovered that their old friend had escaped punishment for the robbery and was now living a prosperous life. They couldn't forgive such a betrayal, but instead of confronting him immediately, they decided to toy with him first. Olivia was convinced that these men were the ones who had been sending the anonymous threats to both her and Ben. The criminals had deliberately driven a wedge between the lovers, making Olivia the prime suspect. Reflecting on the attack in the basement, Olivia realized that she had likely encountered one of them. It all pointed to the fact that her suffering was part of a long-anticipated revenge plot against Ben. The trailer reeked of alcohol, and its owner, Danny Hodges, looked sick and downtrodden. He struggled to speak, refusing to answer Olivia's questions about Ben's last days or his possible involvement in the anonymous threats. In fact, he bluntly said he wanted nothing to do with digging up the past and claimed he had long forgiven that jerk Miller. Olivia didn't believe the hardened criminal's repentance for a second. She was convinced that behind Hodges' indifferent facade was a simmering hatred. Thompson used all her persuasive skills to get him to open up. She told him about her suspicions regarding Ben's old pals being involved in his stalking and death. In the end, an age-old trick worked. Olivia framed the situation as if she were searching for Ben's real killer to avenge his death. She managed to convince Danny that she and Ben had been a couple until the very end and were planning a future together. Allegedly, Ben was going to leave his family and start a new life, but someone cruelly took him out. This story played on Hodges' ego and wounded pride. He was clearly flattered that such an attractive and successful woman was seeking his help and trust. When Olivia, pretending not to notice the dirt and stench, accidentally brushed her hand against Danny's, he melted completely. It had been a long time since the criminal had evoked anything but disgust from women. Hodges let slip that a former cellmate of his, nicknamed the Snake, was indeed planning to settle old scores with that little rat Miller. Apparently, rumors had reached the Snake about Ben's good life, and he was furious that he had served time instead of him. Danny claimed he had tried to talk his friend out of doing anything rash, but the Snake wouldn't listen. The mention of the Snake sent a chill down Olivia's spine. That was the nickname of one of the robbers whose picture she had seen in old newspaper archives while researching the store robbery. It was Ben's accomplice, the one who had shot the clerk. The Snake had received a 25-year sentence and had just been released recently, right around the time Olivia and Ben's troubles began. Realizing that the Snake was the key to solving both Ben's murder and her own misfortunes, Olivia vowed to track the man down and expose the truth. She felt she was unraveling the tangled mess, piecing together the puzzle. Danny said the Snake was hanging around an old warehouse in the industrial zone, using it as a sort of hideout. Without hesitation, Olivia headed to the address Danny had given her. On the way, she called the detective and told him about her suspicions regarding the Snake. Thompson knew she was playing a dangerous game, but there was no turning back. She had to find answers to the questions that had been tormenting her. The warehouse was in ruins. Trash, syringes, bottles, and old mattresses were scattered everywhere. Olivia carefully made her way deeper into the building, listening intently to every sound. Suddenly, she heard some rustling in a distant corner and headed toward it. Behind a pile of crates, she found a filthy mattress with someone lying on it. It was the Snake, a gaunt, haggard man with a scar running across his face. He was asleep and didn't immediately notice that he was no longer alone. Olivia, filled with disgust, surveyed the vile lair of the man who had stirred up her worst nightmares. Her hand instinctively reached for a metal rod lying nearby. The clang of rusty metal on the concrete floor woke the Snake instantly. Seeing Olivia, he was at first terrified, mistaking her for a ghost from his past. But once he realized who she was, a nasty grin spread across his face, and he sneered, Well, look who's here. Isn't this Ben's little girlfriend? And where are the cops? I thought you'd be locked up by now for killing that piece of trash." Olivia's vision darkened. So, she hadn't been wrong. The Snake was not only behind the threats but also involved in Ben's death. Unable to contain her rage, she lunged at the scumbag with the rod, desperate to beat a confession out of him. But the Snake was faster. He jumped up, twisted her arm, and slammed her to the floor. Then something unexpected happened. The Snake, clearly rattled by Olivia's sudden appearance, began to ramble incoherently, spitting and trying to strangle her. Through the haze of fear and pain, Olivia caught fragments of his muttering, "Ben, money, setup, clerk, scumbag, snitch." With all her remaining strength, Olivia fought back, choking and gasping for air. Then, her trump card came into play. Her weakened fingers fumbled in her jacket pocket until they found her smartphone. She turned on the recorder and let the phone slip from her grasp. Moments later, the wail of a police siren echoed through the warehouse. The resolution of this grim story turned out to be as unexpected as it was inevitable. During interrogation, the Snake confessed to everything, realizing that Olivia's recording of his rambling confession at the warehouse was direct evidence against him. He revealed that he had indeed been plotting his revenge against Ben Miller during the 14 years he spent in prison. Upon his release and learning that his former accomplice was thriving, the Snake harbored a deep-seated hatred. Together with his gang, the Snake started slowly. First, He spread rumors among Ben's old friends about his dark past, aiming to discredit him in the eyes of both his lover and wife. Then, he began sending anonymous threats to Ben and Olivia, trying to drive a wedge between them. Finally, he attacked Thompson, assaulted her, and posed as a vengeful avenger for Lisa's honor. The culmination of the snake's plan was to be Ben's murder, with Olivia framed for the crime. The criminal sought to punish the traitor and double-crossing accomplice while simultaneously destroying Olivia's reputation. He coldly shot Ben, and then Ben's wife, dressed in Olivia's clothes, was captured on the security cameras near Ben's house. At that moment, the snake was strangling Olivia in a basement, providing her with an alibi. All that remained for the police was to gather the evidence proving the snake and his accomplice's guilt. Lisa was also sentenced for aiding in the murder of her husband. As for Olivia, all charges against her were dropped. Moreover, she was officially recognized as a victim of a deranged criminal and rapist. Standing over Ben's grave 6 months after the tragedy, Olivia reflected on what had happened. Life had taught her a bitter lesson. Too much in relationships is driven by selfishness and vanity. In her pursuit of the illusion of happiness with Ben, she had made many mistakes, allowing herself to be used in someone else's game. But ultimately, it was Ben who was to blame. He chose his path and paid for the sins of his past. Ben had always run from responsibility, seeking easy routes and comforting arms without considering the consequences for those close to him. Now, Olivia realized that she could never have built a family with such a man. Lisa, it seemed, had gotten used to turning a blind eye to her husband's duplicity, enduring his affairs out of fear of losing her image as the perfect wife. Ben took both women's blindness and complacency for granted. In the end, his past caught up with him at the worst possible moment, but in a way there was a kind of higher justice in that. Olivia felt she had learned the right lessons from this ordeal. Not only had she found the strength to stand up to the fateful circumstances, but she had also come to understand herself better. Thompson realized she deserved true love and respect, not the fate of being an eternal mistress with the label of a homewrecker. The trials she endured and the false accusations had made her stronger and wiser. The Crime Chronicles of Oregon will forever record the story of one crime that concealed a whole drama of human passions, youthful mistakes, and belated realizations. All Olivia could do was move forward, keeping Ben's memory in her heart without losing her head. And who knows, maybe this sad tale will serve as a lesson to others, that it's best not to dig up other people's secrets, for they, like everything else in life, have a way of resurfacing at the most unexpected moments.